Is the new TOEFL test easier than the previous versions of the test? What are some strategies that I can use to score higher on this test? Well, if you've asked yourself any of these questions, you're in for a treat because in today's video, I'm going to share with you my experience taking the 2026 edition. I almost said 2025. 2026 already, and from the title of the video you already know that I scored 6 out of 6. That was my overall score, and I'm gonna share my best tips and tricks to help you score a high score as well. Well, if this is your first time here, my name is Natalie, and I help English learners navigate their way to fluency without fear or overwhelm. All right, let's dive into all things TOEFL iBT new edition. Right off the bat, let me share with you what I think are 3 essential pillars for any successful language proficiency test preparation. That was a long phrase right there. These are language development, test taking strategies, and emotional intelligence. I'm not going to expand on these yet because I'm going to explain what these mean as I share my experience in each of the sections of the test. All right, we're going to focus on my experience taking the TOEFL now. I have my notes here because I don't trust my mom brain, my sleep-deprived brain. I'm going to be honest, I did not have a lot of time to prepare for the test. I think I had about 2 weeks, and for me, as someone who teaches English, who speaks English fluently, of course, it's a good amount of time. It's not terrible. And of course, I also teach TOEFL. I've been teaching TOEFL for almost a decade now. The biggest problem was just finding time to practice as a busy adult, as a mom, as somebody who works as well. And yeah, just not enough time. But this is what I did. I prioritized practice. Start with a full practice test. I'm pretty sure if you're watching this video and you can understand me pretty well, it's because your English is already pretty advanced. That's my guess. And if not, that's okay. I would still suggest that you start with the full practice test because that's going to give you an idea of where you're at and what you should be focusing on. So for example, when I took the free ETS full practice test, I noticed right away that on the reading, I had trouble with the complete the words task. That's the very first task. It's not a difficult task. It's just tricky because I was trying to complete every single missing word. And there were a couple words that I couldn't think of right away. And I noticed that was mostly a matter of practice because once I saw the answer key, it was obvious. I'm like, I know these words. So really that was a matter of familiarity with the task because the previous TOEFL didn't have that task. And taking the practice test allowed me to spot these gaps. So that's why I highly recommend that you start by taking a full practice test. Really block off an hour and a half of your time, maybe 2 hours if you have that privilege. I mean, for me as a mom, I had to use like personal time, like I don't have all the time in the world to practice, but that's what I did. Block off that time, like 2 hours to complete a full practice test to see where you're at. And then I also remember when I took the practice test, distraction was a big problem for me on the listening section. So distraction and also knowing how to take better notes because I was very used to the older version of the test. This version, there's not as much note taking involved. So it took me a little while to understand where I should be just listening and where I should be taking notes. We'll talk more about this as we talk about each of the sections of the test. And then the writing, I had no issues, but I guess the biggest thing was time management. I wasn't managing my time really well, and taking the practice test, timing myself as I was taking that practice test was also a game changer because that showed me that I wasn't managing my time well. Something that took me by surprise. When I took the practice test and we got to the speaking section, I was really blown away by how different it is. And I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. I just have to listen and repeat, right, what they say. So that was the first task, the listen and repeat task. I thought this is going to be easy, but it got more complex. And I had a really hard time remembering the words because you have to say the words exactly as they say it. So I had a really hard time remembering word by word, and I thought, yep, this is what I need to practice. The interview, for example, I didn't feel bad about it. I mean, it was an interview. I'm used to it. I'm used to talking to people. So I didn't have trouble with that. Perhaps your case here is very different from mine. You're not used at all to being interviewed. You're not used to talking to others in English. And this is why you have to take that practice test to see where you're at and come up with strategies. And if you're having trouble doing that, I just want to let you know that I do offer TOEFL prep programs. And if you want to be my student, there's a link in the description that you can click with all the information about my classes. And if you have any further questions, feel free to send me an email. In a nutshell, my preparation consisted of a lot of practice tests because I did not have a lot of time to go over each section in detail. I only had 2 weeks. Every day I practiced for a little bit. I remember the first time I took the practice test, a full practice test, and then each day I focused on a different section of the test. And then I think a couple days before the test, I took another full practice test. ETS offers 2 free practice tests, so take advantage of that. I also used TST Prep to practice. I also try to use my speaking score. There are so many people who have recommended it. I'm going to be honest, when I answered the questions, my score was not good. It was like 3.5, and I don't understand why, but I don't know. Maybe they were trying to sell me their practice tests. I don't know, but this is my experience, okay? That's what I'm sharing. Maybe you've had luck with it. I don't know. So many people recommend it. And this is why I think having a human teacher can also be so helpful, because machines can only take you so far. If you're taking notes, let me simplify your life. First, block off some time to take a full practice test, and then get familiar with the structure of the test, with the tasks as well. And that way you have less cognitive load. Your brain will be focusing on the language, on the test, rather than on understanding what you're supposed to do. Okay, that's essential. These are the first priorities when you first start preparing for the TOEFL test. Now, let me give you a breakdown of each section, what I did, my different strategies. And I'm looking at my second screen. So if I'm looking all over the place, that's because I have notes and I have my second screen as well. So let's start with the reading. And I don't have a lot of time because my kid's napping. I'm trying to record this video while he's napping. So anyways, so the reading, the very first task is the complete the words task. So it went well, except that I couldn't come up with 2 words in 2 different passages at first. Hear me out. Instead of getting stuck, I moved on. I kept answering the next questions, the next tasks, and then I had time left over. I had like 4 minutes left over because my reading speed is high. So that's something else you can work on too, on your reading speed, reading faster and understanding what you're reading. So then when I had time left over, I went back to the complete the words task, and right away my brain remembered those 2 words. So I was able to complete everything. So if you get stuck on that task, move on. Perhaps you have some time left over. Don't get stuck trying to think of one single word, and then you'll waste time, and then you won't be able to complete the section. So work on your reading speed. Try timing yourself as you read a passage while you're practicing, so that way you're used to reading under pressure. And then read in daily life. That was easy for me. I'd say a tip for you, immerse yourself in the language, send emails, answer emails, read emails. That's already practice. I mean, you're already practicing as you were living your daily life. The read an academic passage was very similar to the previous version of the test. And so that wasn't hard for me, except that it's shorter, much shorter. So I thought it was easier. And what I did with all of the reading comprehension questions, first, I read the prompt. Then I went to the text to find what they were asking me to find, right? And then I went back to the alternatives. This works for me a lot, really well. You have to see what works for yourself. Some people read the prompt and all the alternatives and go to the text. I don't like to do that. That confuses me. I like to find the answer right away, and that way I know I'm not tricked by other alternatives that seem similar. So first, I read the prompt, then I go to the text, and then I go to the alternatives and I start eliminating. And if I find the right answer right away, right, I click on it. I just check the other alternatives just in case, but doing this ensures that I choose the right answer, and then I don't get so confused and I don't try to keep changing the answer as well. All right, now the listening section. The listen and choose a response. You have to be quick. You listen, focus, like pay attention, maybe even close your eyes. That could help as well. There's no time for note taking on that task. So a good way to practice is to just take practice tests, lots of them. The free ETS ones, TSC Prep has lots of them as well. So you listen. I close my eyes a lot because I have a really hard time focusing during the listening. So then listen to a conversation. That was a little tricky for me because on the previous test, specific details weren't as important. But on this test, I noticed that these little details do matter. Like they ask, I don't know, somebody's talking about buying a laptop and an iPad. And if you don't hear that it's a laptop and an iPad, and then they ask you, what was the student trying to buy? And I'm like, wait, was that an iPod or an iPad? I mean, probably not an iPod. Nobody buys that anymore. But you know what I'm saying? Specific details do matter. So I just try to take a few notes, very brief notes on this test, so I could focus on understanding the conversation as well. And then listen to an announcement. Same thing. I focused on keywords, just keywords, and really paying attention to what they were saying. Closing my eyes, trying to stay focused. That helped me a lot. And then listen to an academic talk. That one was very similar to the previous version of the TOEFL. Taking notes, lots of drawings and arrows. That was a game changer for me too, because the listen to an academic talk, the passage is longer, and I really have a hard time remembering details, remembering relationships between ideas. So I do a lot of note taking and drawing, but of course, in a way that doesn't distract me. Honestly, I wish I had a method to tell you how to do this. I think it depends on the person. I've tried teaching my specific method to different students, but I've noticed that not everything works for everyone. I actually have a friend who took the TOEFL test many times, and she never took notes because that was easier for her. She has really good memory. Like, she'll listen to something, she'll retain that information, and she used to score 30 out of 30. So I'm using the older scale now, the older score. She always scored 30 out of 30 because she has really good memory. Now, something that happened on the listening, I did have a little bit of trouble because the app just went out. The app stopped working and I had to get reconnected. The proctor helped me through all this ordeal, but I did have to reconnect and restart the app a few times, and then it eventually worked. So it picked up where it had left off, so that was good. And I was able to complete the listening, and again, I scored 6 out of 6, so that was good. So the writing, the build a sentence task was very easy for me because as a teacher, I feel like this is one of those activities that I always give my students. I'm working with beginners now at the college where I teach, and we're always unscrambling words, trying to put them in the right order. So again, practicing that task is essential. Timing yourself, doing things under pressure. And then the writing email was easy. Start writing emails now, right away. I'm saying this because so many of you may not have a lot of time. Like I didn't have a lot of time to prepare, so I didn't really practice writing an email because I do that every day. That's part of what I do. But if you know that you're not really good at writing emails, start practicing today. A lot of people love to use templates. You can do that. TST Prep has lots of templates. TOEFL with Yuva, I think that's how you say her name, or Juva. She has templates too. I do not use templates. I just like to be creative and I trust my English. But if you don't trust your English, you're not there yet. Use templates. You can do that. There are lots of templates out there, but just be careful. Try not to sound too artificial. Try to sound as natural as possible. And then writing for an academic discussion. When I did my master's degree, that's what I did every week, every day, always writing for a discussion. So that wasn't hard for me, but I know for many of you, this may be very unfamiliar. So again, practicing writing for an academic discussion, asking ChatGPT to give you feedback can be very helpful as well. There are lots of prompts that you can use, such as what can make my argument stronger? What am I missing? How can I make this text more cohesive? Now, on to the speaking, which was my least favorite part. I'm going to be honest with you. I teach TOEFL prep, but I struggle with the fact that proficiency tests are not a reflection of your English. Maybe that's a good thing for you to know if you happen to never score high on these tests, because it is not a reflection of your English. So the interview was okay. That's the last task. It was a little awkward talking to this, like, clearly an AI person, like not a real person. I don't know, it's kind of awkward. I wish there was just a picture there. But the interview was okay. Again, you can use templates to help structure your answer. I did not use templates. I don't know if that affected my score. But I think the hardest part for me clearly was the listen and repeat task, because first of all, the context was very unfamiliar to me. Something to do with a like movie set and the lighting. I don't know. It was really like not something that I do on a daily basis. I mean, I do record videos for YouTube, but I'm not a professional. It was really specific. It had to do with the lighting of the set, and I could understand everything, of course, but I had trouble remembering all the words as it got more complex. So the very first sentences were shorter, so that was okay. I listened to the prompt, I repeated it. Something that really helped me when I was preparing for the test, because I noticed right away when I took the practice test that the listen and repeat was the hardest part of the test for me. That's funny to say that, because I think for most people that's the easiest from what I've heard so far. First, I focused on the picture. There's a picture that they show you. I focused on looking at the picture so I could remember, I could associate the picture and the word that they were saying. But then I also counted the syllables, and that helped me remember each of the words. Because many months ago, I read a study saying that when students know how to count syllables, it's easier for them to learn pronunciation and vocabulary. So for example, the word distraction, if I know that it's got 3 syllables, if I learn distraction, it helps me better remember how to say the word. And so for example, if they say, welcome to the studio, welcome to the studio, I try to count the number of beats. That helped me. So welcome to the studio. And they would say, welcome to the studio. And then I'm like repeating that right away in my head. But then when it got to the more complex sentences, I had trouble remembering think was 1 or 2 words. There were a couple times where I paraphrased it because I couldn't remember the exact word. And that's a weakness that I have. I have trouble remembering each word. If you tell me to say something to someone else, I'll paraphrase it. That's what I'm used to doing. And this is why I don't like that type of test very much, because there's no time to prepare, sure, because you have to say it right away. But then the sentences get to be so long. At least for me, they were very long. I think it depends a lot on your level of English because the test adapts to your level. So if you're scoring lower, they're not going to give you the very complex sentences. I remember it got to a point where there were a couple words that I wasn't familiar with, but I heard the words and I could pronounce them. But then I couldn't remember the other ones because I got distracted by the word I did not know. So really, this is a matter of practice. Now, I'm going to go back to the 3 pillars: language development, test-taking strategies, and emotional intelligence. I wouldn't have scored such a high score if I hadn't had the English that I have right now. I've been teaching English for such a long time now. This is what I do for a living. So because I can speak English really well, I didn't have to spend a lot of time on language development. But here's the thing. Maybe that's not your case. Maybe your level is B1, B2, and how can you prepare? How can you develop your language as you prepare for the test? Honestly, the best way to do this, I'm talking to busy adults, right, is to practice for the test, like taking practice tests and learning while taking these tests, because you're going to come across new words. You're going to come across new vocabulary, new grammar structures. So for example, you're practicing the reading, you're timing yourself, but then try to read without timing yourself. Maybe you come across a structure that you are not familiar with. You highlight that structure. I would suggest that you learn as you practice. I don't think you should separate these things and just, okay, now I'm going to focus on the present perfect and then I'll focus on conditionals. I think if you separate that, you risk spending too much time working on language development and not getting familiar with the test, because when you're learning as you do, you are saving time because you're getting familiar with the test. You are developing test-taking strategies and learning language at the same time. So this is the best way, in my opinion, to develop your language skills, especially if you're practicing on your own. For you to develop test-taking strategies, TST Prep has lots of great videos, and I would say watch recent videos. Again, the test has changed. There's a lot of content out there that's very old, very outdated. Focus on recent content. As for emotional intelligence, I would say this is a life skill, not just for the test, but anything in life, right? Practice reacting differently to things that upset you. Just think that on the test day, something can go wrong. Your computer may freeze. Something could happen, and being able to bounce back to that emotional state where you're calm is essential, because when we're anxious, when we're stressed out, I always say this in my videos, if you watch my videos, we have reduced access to our working memory, which is responsible for language processing. So I think it's really important that you focus on remaining calm, on learning to remain calm as you prepare for the test. It's not easy, I know, but again, baby steps. Now, the $1,000,000 question, is this test easier? I would say so. I think it is easier because if you compare 2 hours to 4 hours or 3 hours, it's so much easier on a cognitive sense. It frees up more brain resources, I guess. Yeah, 2 hours is much better than 3 hours. It's insane how long it used to be. So in that sense, I think the test is easier on your brain. Even the tasks too, the reading passages are much shorter and the topics are not as out of this world. So overall, I think the test is easier in that sense that it's not as cognitively demanding as it used to be. But I still think the test is very tricky, especially if you're not used to taking proficiency tests. It really boils down to practicing a lot and getting familiar with the test. So in my experience, the test is easier, but easier is not the same as easy. Okay, so I'm not saying the TOEFL is easy. I don't think it is. If you ever see anyone saying online that the test is really easy, don't trust them because it's not. Well, if you enjoyed this video and you want to work with me to achieve your TOEFL goals, feel free to click the link in the description. Or if you're curious about other classes and programs that I offer, check out my website. Also, check out my free Google Classroom community. And well, I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Thanks for watching.